Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Pro Tem Tasha Harper-Madison, proud City Council representative of District 1 in East and Northeast Austin. Welcome to another edition of our bi-weekly talk show, live stream, Talk with Tasha. Welcome to another edition of our bi-weekly live stream, Talk with Tasha. See, I got it right that time. We're coming at you every 2 weeks with critical conversations about issues and events that really matter most to you. Sweet Mary Jane. Everyone's favorite illegal plant is increasingly becoming less illegal across the country. But right in the Lone Star State, the sticky icky remains off limits, even though one recent Texas Tribune poll shows a solid majority support some level of legalization. Tonight, I've got two folks on the show. We're going to try to make that sweet dream a solid reality. But before we get to them, we unfortunately need to talk about the pandemic. This morning, our Austin public health officials raised our COVID-19 community risk guidelines back up to stage 4. This comes just 1 week after we entered stage 3. The highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus is driving big surges in new infections and in hospitalizations. At the rate we're on, officials are warning that our regional healthcare system is at risk of being overwhelmed again. The vast majority of hospitalizations are patients who have not been vaccinated. But even those who have been fully vaxxed, our stage 4 guidelines recommend that you wear your mask when you're around other people indoors. Our state leaders took away our most effective tools to flatten the curve. So these are just recommendations, but private businesses can, in fact, require that you wear a mask. So make sure you always have one on. It's important to remember that a lot of people remain unvaccinated for reasons other than personal choice. Kids under 12 remain unvaccinated, people with compromised immune systems, and marginalized residents who have had limited access and are still vulnerable to this deadly disease. People who are fully vaccinated still can get COVID-19, but generally their symptoms are less likely to be serious. However, they can still pass it on to people who are not protected. So please, everyone out there, regardless of your vaccination status, please mask up. Let's protect our community together. Learn more about the stage 4 guidelines at www.austintexas.com/COVID-19. Okay, so turning back to today's show, as I said, we're talking THC, pot, marijuana. People have been pushing to legalize it for decades. Progress has been slow here, but it has been made across the country. And even here in Texas, just a tiny little bit. Here in Austin, there's an effort afoot to make decriminalization an official part of our city code. Joining us tonight to talk about that is Ground Game Texas's Mike Siegel, and to provide context about state-level policy and what it could take to end a century of prohibition, we have Executive Director of Texas Normal, Jax Finkel. Hey, y'all. I'm so excited to be joined by y'all. Thanks for coming in.
Hello.
Hey, Mayor Pro Tem. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to be able to say that, as we go into this show, not only are we going to talk about things that are extraordinarily important, but I think we're going to educate some people, and that's really important too. So if I will start with you, Jax, if you're good with that, especially from the policy perspective, can you give us a 30,000-foot view of marijuana laws in this country, but most especially here in Texas?
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we're over a century of prohibition because here in Texas, it started in El Paso in 1915 and expanded across the country. So we had our last big round of decriminalization efforts in the 70s, where at the time we were ahead of the nation and being advanced in our decriminalization efforts. However, in the 1990s, late 90s, the laws changed. So previously, cities could change their drug laws to reflect the desires of their constituents. But in 1997, there was going to be a medical cannabis initiative in San Marcos There was some negative press around it with some college kids that smoked on the courthouse steps. It didn't pass, but the legislature was like, what y'all doing over there? I see y'all. We don't like that. We want to be in control of that. And so they changed where we have to change the drug law at the state level. Now, there is discretion that DAs, sheriffs, city councils can take within their municipalities, but, we'll get into that, I think, with Mike here in a little bit. But where we stand at the statewide level is we just finished a historic session here in Texas. Back in 2019, a hemp program was rolled out, and there was attempts to update it and improve it for farmers, but along the way there were multiple attempts by the lieutenant governor to create this Delta 8 ban, which we can talk about later. We were able to thwart that because clearly prohibition based on a chemical component of a plant is not effective or cost effective in any manner either. And that didn't pass, but there was a concentrate bill that the DAs really got behind, and they attempted to put a D8 ban on that as well, and that made the clock run out on it, and it wasn't able to pass. But what did get through is an improvement of the Texas Compassionate Use Program. So in addition to the hemp program that we have with this robust retail market in Texas, also farmers, manufacturing, there is a limited medical cannabis program, and over the years it's slowly been grown. And basically it allows for low THC cannabis oil for people who have epilepsy, seizure disorders, cancer, PTSD has been added, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, spasticity, autism, peripheral neuropathies, ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and several dozen other incurable neurological disorders. And so we've seen this program slowly growing, but unfortunately it still does leave a lot of patients behind. And because of the arbitrary cap on THC, it does really limit the formulations and methods that doctors are able to use with their patients. We did also see a lot of bills moving forward about different conversations, such as, insurance coverage for medical cannabis, decriminalization of flower, concentrates, and paraphernalia, and there was bipartisan support for a lot of these. However, we did see that the lieutenant governor was the pinch point. So that's where we stand right now. And during the interim, there's likely to be interim charges, regulatory advocacy opportunities, additionally, elections. We know that that's a very important conversation to be having. And so there's a lot to do during the interim, and I think with the initiative that Mike is working on with Julie is extremely important because we need to have a continued conversation about this and making sure that in our city, we are not wasting any funds that could be spent on someone who has actually been, hurt in some manner instead of these nonviolent offenders that are possessing a plant.
I really appreciate that. And I think you've done this before because that was a fantastic segue.
Boom, boom.
So what's Ground Game Texas and what's the petition drive all about?
Right on. Well, thank you, Natasha. So Ground Game Texas is an initiative of Julie Oliver and myself, two recent progressive congressional candidates. And the idea was we didn't want to go back to our day jobs. We wanted to keep doing the work of organizing across Texas. And we also wanted to fit into the existing ecosystem. Obviously, we have a lot of wonderful political organizations in the state. We didn't want to redevelop the wheel, basically, and we didn't want to cover anyone's tracks with people who are already doing good work. And so what we've focused on is basically taking progressive, popular policy ideas and trying to develop city-based initiatives to organize basically on a direct democracy framework, put these on the ballot and adopt them directly from the people. And the issues we're working on are basically three categories of issues. We call them workers, wages, and weed. And it's based on the research that we've done of 2020. We saw Joe Biden, obviously our president, outperformed by some issues across the country. For example, in Florida, a Trump-winning state, they passed a minimum wage increase. In Nebraska, they passed a bill to basically ban certain forms of payday lending to let people keep their paychecks. In Missouri, another Trump state, they passed Medicaid expansion to give people more health care. And in South Dakota, a state Donald Trump won by over 20 points, they legalized recreational marijuana in South Dakota, y'all. So based on this learning, we feel like, okay, there are these very popular issues that are basically, they go beyond the Democratic voter base. And frankly, if some people knew that Democrats fought on these issues, these would be good issues for Democrats. And so we're thinking about a lot of ballot measures across the state, but we have started here in Austin to build on the strong political base we have here. And so right now we're circulating a measure called the Austin Freedom Act of 2021. And at this point, we're looking to get it on the ballot in May 22. And the idea is to do two things: to build on the wonderful reforms that the city council and mayor have already passed in Austin, which basically have changed police policy to stop arresting and to stop issuing citations for marijuana. Those reforms are currently adopted pursuant to a resolution, and we want to make them permanent. And these reforms are extremely important. They've stopped hundreds of people a year from being arrested and thousands of people a year being cited for marijuana. And so we want to take those reforms and also include a ban on no-knock warrants, which is a very dangerous police tactic where they break into people's homes without announcing themselves, without identifying themselves as police, and have really resulted in some terrible tragedies, including in Breonna Taylor, her death in Louisville, Kentucky. So we are collecting signatures on that and honored to have the support of the Mayor Pro Tem. And we've got over 18,000 signatures. Also give a shout out to Texas Normal for supporting that. And so basically at this point, we're going for 30,000 plus signatures. We think we can have that by September. And what we're hoping to do is to announce success in Austin and then inspire other cities across the state. Because as Jax mentioned, this is an extremely popular issue. The recent polling in Texas, Quinnipiac poll shows that 87% of Texans support some level of decriminalization. So this is a very popular issue, and there's only a few elected officials on the top, like Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who are stopping a very common sense reform that will not only make economic sense to put more money towards real public needs, and you can also create tax income, but also it's a health justice issue, and we know it's a racial justice issue. Just to take one example, we did a public information request in Killeen, Texas, a city that's 40% African-American, and 77% of the arrests for marijuana were Black folks there. And we know white people smoke weed too. I can testify. I know plenty of white people who smoke marijuana, but unfortunately, marijuana enforcement has become very racially biased, kind of like these vagrancy laws and other laws that are unfortunately used as a pretext to stop and harass people. So big picture, we want to formalize the decriminalization in Austin and then take this movement on the road to decriminalize in many cities across Texas.
I appreciate all of that. You actually answered several of my questions already, so I'm gonna have to think of some more while I'm asking Jax. So what I think, this is the thing that has always confused me about when we speak about this issue. I often will reframe policy priorities by talking dollars and cents. I'm talking to people about what they want to hear about, and it's their money and their house and the safety of their family. And so when I shift the conversation and talk about money, it often tends to sort of just make the conversation go smoother. So I can't help but wonder, for a state like ours that really prides itself on being pro-business, why the heck have we not given the green light to what some experts say we could generate up to $24 billion? The industry generates up to $24 billion. Why don't we want a part of that?
And jobs and, better health for people, lower Medicare Part D spending, all of these things. But let me just tell you, let's put the responsibility where it belongs, on the Lieutenant Governor's shoulders, because the fact of the matter is that a bipartisan supermajority passed a lot of these types of legislations out of the House, and if they could have gotten to the Senate floor, I think we would have had even more. Now, the legalization conversation is a little bit kind of trickier because of the intoxication aspect of it, but when we were having the Delta 8 conversation with the people at the Capitol, banning something is not going to stop people from consuming it, as we've clearly seen throughout time. In fact, it just creates a barrier and a burden on the people that you are marginalizing with it. So rather than that, institute some common sense regulations. Make sure there's labeling that says that you can fail a UA if you use something like that. Make sure that you have to be over the age of 21, because that's the same for tobacco and alcohol here in Texas. Make sure that the products have to pass certain testing to make sure that nothing is in it. These create jobs. This creates an industry. We've seen it in other places. And it's not, the legislature by and large is not against this. They are for this type of policy. It is the Lieutenant Governor who has, at every possible opportunity, tried to thwart it. And in fact, this session, we were afraid he wasn't even going to let the medical bill pass. And so we really had to fight hard to get the limited changes that we did get this session. Now, in all fairness, this session was wild. I mean, we had ERCOT, winter storms, COVID pandemic, their own set of priorities as well. And I was thankful that we got what we got, which were some parental protections, some improvements in conditions and formulations, and also there will now be able to be research done in Texas with Texas products. So these are very important things, but there was a lot left on the table that had a lot of bipartisan support. And so whenever we're talking about voting, Texas Normal does a voter's guide. So we'll be having one rolling out for the primaries in March. So go to texasnormal.org then, and you'll be able to find our most up-to-date version of the voter's guide. Because back in 2012, I was realizing, a lot of people cared about cannabis, but there's no way to find out what the candidates' positions were. It wasn't on the League of Women Voters candidate guide, right? And so that's why we created this, and we also do, local to Austin candidate forums, which of course Mike and Julie have both participated in. We tend to focus at the state level because that's where we have to change the law, but fortunately in Austin and in a lot of other urban areas, we've got great allies that are working on these local resolutions as well.
Absolutely. And it seems, like legalization is inevitable, but which scenario is more likely in your mind's eye? Texas moves incrementally to legalize medicinal first, then recreational, and then maybe gets around to expungement, if ever? Or do we just do it all?
Expungement's going to take a change to our Constitution, I believe, is my understanding about it. Now, there was a standalone expunction bill that Senator Collier had that was great and was actually a priority of the Speaker of the House. So I think all of these things are working and happening, and I think what's really going to impact it the most is what happens at the federal level. Is President Biden actually going to go through with some of the promises that he's made relating to cannabis? Because if he does, and if he deschedules, then that puts a lot of pressure on Texas. It basically recreates what happened with hemp back in 2019, which is where it was descheduled at the federal level, and then we either created our own infrastructure, or it was the Wild West, or we had to go with what the USDA had. And so Texas was like, oh, I guess we'll come up with a program then. So the president has a lot of impact on what can happen in Texas, and then it's up to us to be there to make sure that thoughtful policy is enacted. So I think that is going to be the biggest bearer of change. I think next session we're going to see a lot more conversation about it, especially the medical component about really making it a robust market. Because listen, people don't know whenever they necessarily cross from Oklahoma into Texas, and they've got their Oklahoma cannabis on them, and it's legal in their mind, and then all of a sudden they're facing felonies in Texas, and that's just unacceptable.
I agree. But it's one of those things where when some people think about marijuana, they're thinking about, stoned kids, like, the kids on the court steps that you talked about earlier. They're thinking about stoned kids watching Kubrick films, but it's not just a recreational drug. How hard is it to penetrate past that stereotype and really educate people about the many different uses rather of the plant?
Well, there is a lot of data coming out of the states that have created this regulated adult use market, and we're not seeing that there's higher teen use. We're not seeing, any of these sky is falling type warnings that people have been giving us. So I think it goes to show that if you allow people to have access that are of age, that you have to show an ID for, these licensed business owners want to continue to practice business. And those that don't, there are ways to take care of that, just like we do now with alcohol and tobacco whenever people are, selling to underage people. So there's fail-safes that are built in. And, I want to touch on something that Mike mentioned in his opening, talking about the social justice aspect and the racial aspect that is there. The fact of the matter is that if you live in Texas, you are 3 times more likely, if you're Black, to be arrested than white people. And I want to remind everyone that when I say that number, white people in Texas includes Latino people. So that is like basically Black people versus a bunch of people who would typically also be considered people of color. So I think we don't know the real depth and the real texture to that. And I don't think that people really recognize that in the statute in Texas, it doesn't say marijuana. It says marijuana with an H. Because when the bills were being crafted, they didn't even bother to understand how to spell the word. It came from, Mexican culture, and I think it just goes to the lack of knowledge and understanding when the laws were being written. And we're having a lot of success with education. If you go to informtexas.org, you can see where we've held multiple educational exhibits up at the Capitol. We've held seminars in rural areas to help, some people who maybe don't usually have access to this kind of education to learn about the plant. We can call it all kinds of fun slang names, but the fact of the matter is, if we want to earn respect, we have to change the stigma associated with it. And so I try to say cannabis a lot, but, people can call it whatever they want. I'm just giving my 2 cents on that. But I think whenever people realize that your body has an endocannabinoid system that works with not only your endogenous cannabinoids, but cannabinoids that you take in through a bunch of other ways, that people kind of start to understand, like, well, how could it work on all these things? Oh, because the sensors are in almost every system of your body. And so therefore it brings homeostasis to that system, and understanding how that works. I mean, I think that changes a lot of people's minds. They don't understand that literally your body has a receptor made for something that is in this plant. And so I think
that's
that
important
can change
information.
minds. Yeah.
It's going to be about the education. I mean, I think so much like everything else, right? So Mike, you mentioned, and I think Jax talked about it, the racial justice issue, and that was not so subtly underscored when y'all launched your petition drive in the shadow of the Willie Nelson statue. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure. I mean, some of the people watching probably read the book by Dr. Michelle Alexander, right? The New Jim Crow. And we know that the war on drugs in this country was basically crafted, during the Nixon presidency as a way to continue Jim Crow laws to oppress and suppress the Black community. And so much of the enforcement, the prosecution, and the incarceration of folks for marijuana has been targeted at the Black community. And meanwhile, we've got, Willie Nelson, who obviously has been celebrating weed culture for decades. And, it's been 2 tiers of enforcement. One shorthand that I use is like, marijuana enforcement wasn't happening on West Campus. It wasn't happening in the frat houses. It was happening in East Austin. And that's true across the state. And that's where, sometimes people ask me and Julie, like, isn't this kind of a frivolous thing? I mean, y'all were running for Congress. You're talking about fighting Trump and protecting democracy. And now you're talking about weed. Aren't there more important things to do? And first of all, we say yes. I mean, voting rights is more important. Healthcare is more important. But frankly, marijuana is an issue that catches people's attention. And, I understand why Jax would want to use the word, cannabis. But last Wednesday night in Austin, we had a Free the Weed party at the Spider House. And it was something that we organized very quickly. It was like a week ahead of time. It was an event that was only between 6 and 9 p.m. We had a few local bands, including Molly Birch perform. And we weren't thinking much. We were thinking a few dozen people would come out. But 300 people came to this concert on a Wednesday night for the Free the Weed concert. And most of these people were young people. I consider them, kids. They're in their 20s. They were dressed up. They were actually not just going to hear the music. They were going to be seen. And to me, to get 300 young people to what is essentially a political event on a Wednesday night, it meant a lot. And it shows the power of this issue as a way to advance other causes. So when I talk about taking this effort on the road, and for example, going to places like Fort Worth or Grand Prairie or Killeen or El Paso, and it's important that we pass marijuana reform because it will keep bodies out of jail. I mean, thousands upon thousands of arrests are made in Texas every year for a marijuana offense, when you can go to Oklahoma, you can go to New Mexico and get it legally right across the border, which is absurd and obscene. And we're denying people medicine. Veterans in particular are, could very much use access to cannabis and all its medicinal uses. I mean, these are folks that don't need to be addicted to opioids, but they have pain, they have PTSD, and marijuana in many cases would be a good treatment. And so there's a lot of important substantive reasons to support marijuana reform, whether you're talking about racial justice or health justice or economic programs. But also, I think it's important because it's a catchy issue. And It may not be as important as housing. Obviously, we're in a housing crisis here in Austin. But if we can use it to get people's attention, if marijuana is not going to be a gateway drug, but it can be a gateway issue to get people interested in politics, I think it could be very valuable. And so my hope is that it could be multifunction in this way, just like the plant itself, whether you're talking about hemp or the flower is multifunction. I'm hoping the issue can be multifunction as well, so that we can address these different issues and also bring people into politics and hopefully get them excited about voting next year.
Well, so do you think September is early enough to get on the November ballot?
So I don't think, unfortunately, we launched this thing on July 2nd publicly. And frankly, the clerk's deadline is already passed for November's ballot. And so, I mean, we have about 18,000 by the end of the weekend. We'll have 20,000, but we have to go back and verify them. And you need 20,000 verified signatures to get on the ballot. So where we're at is we're looking to basically keep collecting signatures through Labor Day. That'll get us to 30,000 plus, which should be a nice cushion. And then it'll be on next May's ballot. So unfortunately, we weren't able to hit that very ambitious goal, but we're still very much on track to getting this on the ballot in May and having it be a permanent part of Austin policy.
Well, so given that you were able to get people to be naughty in the middle of the week, come out and support the cause, can you tell our general audience, how can people get involved with Ground Game's efforts? What can they do?
Well, thank you so much. Right now, there's two main jobs we need help with. One is gathering petition signatures. And then we need people, if you're not the socialite who's going to basically, take a clipboard and get other people to sign it, there's also jobs to basically verify that everyone who's signing is an Austin voter. And so I think y'all have the website, but we have a simple one, ggtx.org for groundgametexas.org/Austin. And you can find the petition page there, information about the campaign. You can actually download it, sign it, mail it in. And you can also share that with your friends. And we'd love to get as many people to sign as possible. Because we know this is a popular issue. And we also, if we think if we can put it on the ballot, that's going to get more people out to vote in these important local elections.
Did I lose you?
No, we're here.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, I lost myself. Well, I think that's all the questions that I had, but I know that people are tuning in and are probably curious. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave them with here in the next couple minutes?
I was going to say the civics aspect of it that Mike mentioned is extremely important. I find that is a lot of the education that we do when we're out doing workshops. What is the election cycle like? So we have a 2-year cycle in Texas. Our legislature meets every 2 years. There's an interim, there's elections in there, and there's all these opportunities for town halls and campaign volunteers and all of this stuff. And a lot of people don't even realize that. They don't know that in Texas, you cannot collect signatures to get something on the statewide ballot to change the law. But to know that locally, you can do something that has to do with the budget and collect signatures and impact it that way, that's an important nuanced difference. And I know that Mike is having to do a ton of research to see, what cities could even do this type of thing, right? So it's a big civics lesson. So if you want to be involved in cannabis, there's a lot of different ways that you can. You can go to texasnormal.org and you can donate to support our work there. You can come and volunteer at events as well. You can become a member. Then you can go and do legislative advocacy during the legislative cycle. We always put out the voter guide so that people can connect with their candidates and volunteer with them, because I think that that's a really important thing. But another thing I want to make sure that everyone who's watching knows is if you go to informtexas.org, there is an upcoming tutorial on how to become a patient. And so if you have any of those, over 100 conditions that are included and you would like to find out how to register, you can do that. The tutorial will be on August 28th at 10 a.m. And that way you'll know how to do it all right by that September 1st date, which is whenever PTSD and cancer and the formulation change are all effective. So I just want to make sure everybody knows about that. Yeah, that's what I got on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any parting words, Mike?
No, thank you so much for having us on. I agree with what Jack said. When I've been organizing all these different cities like Mission and Grand Prairie and El Paso, and when I present to these groups, hey, you actually have this power under your city charter to adopt a law directly. The city council doesn't have to vote on it. You just have to get the signatures and put it on the ballot directly. To me, that's a very rare thing. Direct democracy. And there's not very many opportunities for it. So I'm really enjoying this work, and I'm enjoying the conversations, and so glad to be in coalition with the two of you to get this done, not just for Austin, but for the state.
Absolutely. And, for what it's worth, I have a couple friends that are what they call medical refugees right now. And I want my friends to come home. I don't want them to have to live somewhere else to be able to treat themselves and their children. So Executive Director of Texas Normal, Jax Finkel, and Mike Siegel of Ground Game Texas. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight.
It's always great to see you.
You too.
Right on. Have a good one, though.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, that was awesome. Well, that does it for this week's installment of Talk with Tasha. But before you kick off your weekend, please remember that we are once again back in stage 4 of our COVID-19 risk-based guidelines. That means everyone, regardless of vaccination status, should be masking up when you go into any shop, restaurant, office, bar, or public building. Find out more at www.austintexas.com/COVID-19. As for everything else, if you ever have any general questions or concerns about our city government, you can always reach out to me at District 1, that's DISTRICT, the number 1 at austintexas.gov. So I suppose until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope you try to have some fun. Peace, y'all.